She became CEO the week her father died, and 5 days later, she fired me like I was nothing. What she didn't know. I wasn't just her employee. I was the only man who still loved her when the power went to her head. The week her father died, the house felt unfamiliar, like grief had rearranged the furniture without touching a single thing. I remember standing beside her at the funeral, watching the wind tug gently at the edges of her black dress. She looked composed from a distance. Strong. Untouchable. But I could feel the tremble in her fingers as they threaded through mine. She didn't cry in public. She never liked to. Instead, she held herself upright with a quiet pride that made my chest ache. That night, when everyone left, she finally collapsed into me. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just slowly. Her forehead rested against my chest, and her hands fisted into the back of my shirt like she was afraid I might disappear too. I wrapped my arms around her and held her tighter than I ever had before, my chin brushing the top of her hair. She smelled like faint jasmine and rain. I remember thinking how small she felt in that moment, not in size, but in vulnerability. 3 days later, the board made it official. She was the new CEO. I watched something shift in her almost instantly. Not her beauty, that was still there, just quieter now. It was the softness that changed. The grief that had made her cling to me hardened into something sharper. Purpose. Responsibility. Pressure. The first morning she walked into headquarters as CEO, she wore a tailored black suit that framed her perfectly, elegant, controlled, intimidating in a way that made executives twice her age straighten their posture. I felt proud. God, I felt proud. That was my wife. But when she looked at me across the conference table, her smile was professional. Polished. Not the private one she used to give me when our knees brushed under dinner tables. That night, she stayed late. And the night after that. I started bringing her coffee to the office around 9 p.m., just to see her. She would look up from her laptop, surprised, and for a second, just a second, I'd see her again. The woman who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen. One evening, I stood behind her chair and gently pressed my thumbs into her tense shoulders. She exhaled softly, leaning back into my touch without thinking. Her head tilted slightly to the side, giving me better access to the tight muscles near her neck. That small surrender felt intimate. Familiar. But it didn't last. Her phone buzzed. She straightened immediately. "Thanks," she said, polite. Distant. At home, the bed began to feel bigger. She'd fall asleep facing the edge, exhaustion pulling her under before we could talk. I'd lie there watching the faint city light trace the curve of her back, wanting to reach for her, and hesitating. I told myself it was temporary. Grief does strange things. Power does stranger ones. Still, sometimes when she brushed past me in the hallway, our arms would graze, and instead of instinctively leaning closer, she'd pause, as if remembering she was supposed to keep walking. I was proud of her. But somewhere between the funeral and the corner office, I started to feel like I was losing her, not to another man, not yet, but to something colder. Ambition. And for the first time since we married, I wasn't sure where I fit in her world anymore. 5 days after she officially became CEO, I was summoned to her office. Not a text. Not a call. A formal email from HR. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, rereading the subject line like it might rearrange itself into something less final. Mandatory executive meeting, 10 a.m. When I stepped into the building that morning, everything felt sharper, the echo of my shoes against marble, the hum of the elevators, the way people avoided eye contact just a second too long. Her office had changed already. The door was closed now. Frosted glass. A quiet barrier between her and everyone else. When I walked in, she was standing by the window, the skyline stretching behind her like something she had conquered. The tailored navy suit fit her perfectly. Her posture was straight, composed, powerful. But her hands were clasped too tightly in front of her. She didn't kiss my cheek. Didn't even move toward me. "Have a seat," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled in a way that felt rehearsed. I sat across from her desk, the same desk I'd leaned against just weeks ago while teasing her about overworking. The same desk where she once reached for my tie and straightened it with a soft smile before a meeting. Now there was space between us. A calculated kind of space. She began explaining restructuring. Departmental shifts. Financial optics. The importance of removing perceived favoritism. I barely heard the corporate language. "You're terminating me," I said quietly. She didn't flinch. But her fingers tightened around the pen in her hand. "It's just business," she replied. "Just business." I searched her face for something: hesitation, regret, warmth. For a moment, her eyes flickered up to mine. There it was. A crack in the armor. A flash of conflict. But it disappeared as quickly as it came. "I can't have people thinking you're here because you're my husband," she added. "I need to lead without question." The words weren't cruel. They were worse. They were cold. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the floor. The sound seemed louder than it should have been. As I stepped toward the desk, our hands almost brushed when I reached for the termination papers. That tiny space between our fingers felt electric. Familiar. She pulled her hand back first. That hurt more than the firing. I signed. Not because I agreed. Not because I understood. But because arguing in that room would have reduced us to something transactional. And I couldn't let our marriage become a negotiation across polished wood. When I turned to leave, I paused at the door. For a second, I almost said her name the way I do at home, soft, intimate. Instead, I said nothing. The elevator ride down felt endless. My reflection in the mirrored walls looked unfamiliar. Smaller. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. 5 days ago, I was the husband who held her together at her father's grave. Now I was an expendable liability. And as I stood there, holding the envelope with my name typed neatly across the front, one thought settled heavily in my chest: she didn't just fire her employee. She pushed away the only person who had ever loved her before the title. And for the first time, I wondered if she even realized what she'd done. I told myself I wouldn't go back to the office. But 3 days after she fired me, HR called about final paperwork. Stock options. Exit formalities. Words that sounded clinical and harmless, but felt like quiet confirmations that I no longer belonged there. The lobby felt colder this time. Not physically. Emotionally. I kept my head down as I walked toward the elevators, nodding politely at familiar faces that suddenly didn't know how to greet me. The ride-up felt slower than usual, like the building itself was reminding me I was no longer part of its rhythm. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, I heard it. Her laugh. Soft. Warm. The kind I hadn't heard at home in weeks. It stopped me mid-step. Through the glass wall of her office, I saw her standing near her desk, not stiff, not formal. Relaxed. One hand resting lightly on the edge of the table as she leaned slightly toward Daniel, the senior operations director. Early 40s. Confident. Polished. He said something I couldn't hear. She smiled. Not the CEO smile. The real one. Then his hand briefly touched her forearm, a casual, reassuring gesture. Professional on the surface. Innocent enough that no one could question it. But she didn't move away. She let it linger half a second too long. Something in my chest tightened. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive jealousy. It was quieter than that. A slow, uncomfortable realization that I hadn't seen her look that at ease in my presence lately. I stepped back before they noticed me, suddenly aware of how out of place I felt on that floor. The paperwork took less than 10 minutes. But my mind replayed that small moment over and over, his fingers against her arm, her shoulders relaxed, the way she tilted her head slightly when she listened. At home that night, she arrived later than usual. When she walked past me in the hallway, I caught a faint scent, not her usual jasmine perfume. Something subtler. Woodsy. Different. Long day? I asked gently. She nodded, slipping off her heels. Board reviews. Strategy meetings. Her tone wasn't defensive. Just guarded. At dinner, I reached across the table for her hand the way I always do when we eat together. For a second, just a second, she hesitated before placing her fingers in mine. Her hand felt warm. Familiar. But there was tension in it. I traced my thumb lightly over her knuckles, a silent question in the gesture. She squeezed back, but her eyes stayed on her plate. Later that night, I lay awake beside her. The room was dim, city lights casting faint shadows across the ceiling. She slept facing away from me again, her breathing steady, controlled. I watched the curve of her back rise and fall and fought the urge to close the distance between us. Was I imagining it? Grief changes people. Power isolates them. But there was something else now. Not an affair, not something reckless or obvious. Something emotional. A space where someone else was standing closer to her thoughts than I was. And that scared me more than any physical betrayal ever could. Because I could compete with a man. I didn't know how to compete with feeling understood. There's something about humiliation that forces clarity. For days after the firing, I kept replaying that moment in her office, the way she said it's just business. The way her hand withdrew from mine like contact itself was a liability. But what she didn't know was that her father never saw me as a liability. He saw me as protection. 2 years before he passed, he asked me to meet him privately at his home study. It was late. The house smelled faintly of old books and cedar polish. He poured us both a drink and studied me for a long moment before speaking. "She's strong," he said quietly. "But strength without balance can become isolation." He told me then about the shares he'd placed quietly in my name, a protective distribution. Not to control her. Not to undermine her. But to ensure that if leadership ever clouded her judgment, there would be someone steady in the room. "You won't use this against her," he said. It wasn't a question. "I won't," I promised. I meant it. I never told her because I never wanted her success to feel inherited through me. She earned that position. She deserved it. I wanted her confidence to grow naturally, not lean on the knowledge that I held silent leverage. But after she fired me, I realized something. This wasn't about power for me. It was about dignity. I requested a quiet meeting with 2 senior board members, people who had known her father for decades. The meeting wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No ultimatums. Just clarity. I explained that I had no intention of destabilizing her position. I wasn't seeking control. But I also wouldn't allow decisions rooted in insecurity to go unchecked. When I showed them the shared documentation her father had arranged, the room went still. Not because I was threatening them. Because they understood what it meant. Her father had trusted me. Not as an employee. As family. Walking out of that building, I didn't feel victorious. I felt heavy. This wasn't a move in a chess game. It was the quiet realization that the woman I loved had tried to prove her strength by cutting out the one person who was never competing with her. That night, when she came home, she looked exhausted. Her shoulders were tense again, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she crossed the living room. I watched her from the couch, noticing the faint crease between her brows that only appeared when she was overwhelmed. "Everything okay?" I asked gently. She nodded too quickly. I stood and stepped toward her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face, my fingers grazing her temple. She closed her eyes at the touch. Just for a second. That small reaction told me something important. She wasn't drifting because she didn't love me. She was drowning in something she didn't know how to carry. And the man standing closest to her in that office wasn't saving her. He was simply present. The difference mattered. What she didn't know yet was this: I could protect her company if I needed to. But what I really wanted was to protect our marriage. And I was running out of time to do both. It didn't happen in her office. It didn't happen in a boardroom. It happened in our kitchen, barefoot, tired, with the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between us. She came home later than usual that night. Not rushed. Not flustered. Just drained. The kind of exhaustion that settles into someone's posture and stays there. I was leaning against the counter when she walked in. She paused slightly when she saw me still awake. "We need to talk," I said gently. Not angry. Not accusing. Just steady. She set her purse down slowly, like she already knew what was coming. "For a while now," I began, "I felt like I've been standing outside our marriage, watching you let someone else inside the parts of you I used to share." Her jaw tightened slightly. "If this is about work, it's not about work," I interrupted softly. "It's about the way you laugh with him." Silence. Her eyes flickered away. "I've seen the way you look when you feel understood," I continued. "And lately, that look hasn't been for me." The words weren't loud. But they carried weight. She crossed her arms, not defensive, but protective. "You think I'm cheating on you?" "No," I said immediately. "Not physically." That made her inhale sharply. "But emotionally?" she asked. I stepped closer. "I think you've been lonely," I said. "And instead of letting me in, you reached for someone who made the pressure easier to carry." Her eyes glistened then. For the first time in weeks, the CEO mask slipped. "I didn't mean for it to feel like that," she whispered. "He just understood what it's like. The board pressure. The expectations. The comparisons to my father. And I don't." My voice cracked slightly despite trying to stay calm. She shook her head quickly. "You do. But you love me. And sometimes love feels biased." That hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. "So you fired me," I said quietly. "To prove you didn't need me." Her composure shattered at that. "I fired you because I was scared," she admitted. "Scared they'd think I was weak. Scared I'd fail. Scared I'd only be the boss's daughter who kept her husband on payroll." Her voice trembled. "I thought if I separated everything, work, marriage, emotion, I could control it." "And instead?" I asked softly. She looked at me fully then. "I pushed away the only person who's never tried to take anything from me." The space between us felt fragile. I stepped closer, lifting my hand slowly to her face. My fingers brushed her cheek, warm and slightly damp from tears she hadn't realized were falling. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she leaned into my palm. Her eyes closed. "I never meant to replace you," she whispered. "You didn't replace me," I replied gently. "You just forgot I was on your side." Her hand slid hesitantly to my waist, holding on, not tightly, not possessively. Just enough to say she didn't want distance anymore. For a long moment, we stood there like that. Foreheads nearly touching. Breathing uneven. No titles. No boardrooms. Just a husband and a wife who had let pride build walls where vulnerability should have lived. And for the first time since she became CEO, she wasn't standing above me. She was standing with me. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 the next morning. She barely slept. I could feel it in the way she shifted beside me, restless, her breathing uneven in the dark. Around 3 a.m., she quietly reached for my hand under the covers, not fully awake, not fully aware, just instinctively searching. I laced my fingers with hers. She didn't pull away. That small gesture told me more than any apology could. When morning came, she dressed slower than usual. No sharp movements. No brisk efficiency. Just quiet thoughtfulness. The deep charcoal suit she chose looked powerful, but there was something softer in her expression when she turned toward me before leaving. "Will you come?" she asked. "Not just professionally, personally." She looked at me, and for once, there was no CEO in her gaze. Just her. "I appreciate the offer," I said calmly. "But I'm declining." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, not hurt, but understanding waiting to form. "I don't want to work for my wife," I continued. "And I don't want her leadership questioned because of me. I want to build something of my own. Something that stands beside her success, not inside it." Silence followed. Then one of the senior board members nodded thoughtfully. The meeting ended without resistance. In the hallway afterward, she stopped walking and turned to me. The polished confidence from inside the boardroom melted away. "You're not leaving me, are you?" she asked quietly. There it was. The real fear. I stepped closer, brushing my fingers gently along her forearm before taking her hand fully. Her grip tightened instantly, not forceful, just afraid. "I'm not walking away from us," I said softly. "But I won't shrink myself to make things easier either." Her eyes filled again, but this time it wasn't panic. It was relief. She stepped into me without hesitation, arms wrapping around my waist. Not carefully. Not cautiously. Just honestly. I held her. Firm. Steady. Familiar. "I don't need you under my title," she whispered against my chest. "I need you beside me." I pressed my lips lightly to the top of her head, not dramatic, just grounding. For the first time since she took that corner office, we weren't fighting for control. We were choosing balance. And that choice, made openly, vulnerably, felt stronger than any promotion ever could. 3 months later, the house felt like ours again. Not quieter. Not louder. Just warmer. She still left early some mornings, still carried the weight of a company on her shoulders, but it no longer followed her through the front door like an uninvited guest. Somewhere between that boardroom decision and now, she had learned how to set the title down before she stepped inside. And I had learned something too. Loving a powerful woman doesn't mean standing behind her. It means standing steady beside her. I started building my own consultancy, small at first, independent contracts, long hours at the dining table with my laptop open. She'd sometimes walk past, pause, and rest her hand lightly on my shoulder as she read over my screen. Not to correct. Not to control. Just to be close. One evening, we sat on the balcony as the sun dipped behind the skyline. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. She kicked off her heels and tucked her legs beneath her, turning slightly toward me. Without thinking, she reached for my hand. Her fingers traced slow, lazy circles across my palm, a habit she used to have when we first dated. Back when conversations lasted until sunrise and neither of us was trying to prove anything. "I was so afraid of failing him," she said quietly, staring at the city lights. Every decision felt like it had his shadow attached to it. I listened. She squeezed my hand gently. "And somewhere in that fear, I forgot you weren't judging me. You were holding me." The honesty in her voice wasn't heavy anymore. It was clear. Settled. I shifted closer, brushing my knee lightly against hers. She leaned into me without hesitation, her head finding its familiar place against my shoulder. The weight of her there felt grounding, not dependent, not fragile, just chosen. "I don't need you to be perfect," I told her softly. "I just need you to let me stand with you." She tilted her face up, eyes softer than I'd seen in months. "I know that now." I pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, slow, lingering, letting it say what words sometimes couldn't. The wind moved a strand of hair across her cheek, and I tucked it behind her ear, my thumb grazing her skin lightly. She smiled, not the CEO smile, not the practiced one. The real one. There would still be long nights. Difficult board meetings. People who questioned her, people who admired her. But now, when she reached for my hand, there was no hesitation. And when I looked at her, I didn't see a woman choosing power over love. I saw a woman who had learned that strength and vulnerability could exist in the same breath. We didn't save our marriage with grand gestures. We saved it with honesty. With balance. With the quiet decision, every day, to sit a little closer, hold a little tighter, and remember that before titles, before ambition, before fear, we chose each other. And this time, we were choosing each other again, fully aware of what it cost, and fully certain it was worth it.